I'm Kisub Che, I'm the CEO of PredictX, and welcome to this webinar on corporate travel sustainability. Of the many symptoms of climate change, one devastating example is wildfires in California. So according to Scientific American, the number of dry, warm, and windy autumn days, perfect wildfire weather in California has more than doubled since the 1980s. Wildfires occur 5 times more now than in the 1970s. And by 2050, California will see more than 10 times the number of devastating wildfires than it saw in the 1970s. Clearly, the alarm bells have been ringing now for a while. Corporations around the world have become more committed to sustainability, fighting climate change. And corporate travel managers have the opportunity to lead their companies toward a more sustainable future. So today I'm excited to be joined by Anne Derry, who's the Director of Corporate Travel and Meetings at S&P Global. Anne's been working with senior leadership to define the strategy so that S&P Global can meet the goal of 25% reduction in business travel emissions by 2025. And Tina Quattlebaum, who is a Director of Global Travel Operations at Pfizer. Tina has been driving her global travel program to become more sustainable with CO2 reduction targets. Pfizer has committed to reducing emissions related to business travel by 25% by 2025. Louise Miller, who is managing partner at Areca Consulting. Her knowledge and experience of technology, distribution, and end-to-end program strategy brings a bird's eye view of what she is seeing with regard to sustainability in the market. Ryan Farrows is category lead at Global Travel Analytics at UBS. Ryan has been working on developing a sustainability strategy and reporting on carbon emissions for the UBS Global Travel Program. And last but not least, we have Hannah Arcaro, who is Regional Environmental Manager for the EMEA region at UBS. She leads UBS's sustainability effort in Europe and has been working with Ryan to incorporate the travel component to UBS's overall strategy. Hannah has been working in sustainability for over a decade now, since her MSc in Coastal and Marine Resource Management. Welcome all. So our audience, let's start with a poll question to get a feel for where the audience is in terms of sustainability in corporate travel. You can answer this question by selecting your choice on the screen. Do you have a corporate travel sustainability strategy in your organization? Yes is no, yes, working on it. While the audience answers the poll, I'd like to ask Hannah the first question. UBS has been very public about its commitment to sustainability. UBS Asset Management has signed a pledge for all companies in its portfolio to be at net zero carbon emissions by 2050 or earlier. So can you explain for us just what net zero means for UBS's sustainability strategy, and at a high level for our audience, how should they start measuring their carbon footprint?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Obviously net zero is sort of an overall balance between the greenhouse gas emissions produced and the greenhouse gas emissions taken out of the atmosphere. So UBS has quite a long history of working on its carbon reduction program, and since 2004 we'd actually reduced our carbon emissions by 79% between 2004 and 2019. But now obviously the narrative has changed and it's more sophisticated, and we're looking at this sort of net zero concept. And so we have a commitment now where we, by 2025, we want to be net zero for our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And then we have a longer term commitment looking at the scope 3 emissions. I mean, in terms of sort of how do you start with measuring your carbon footprint, it depends where you are on the journey, but if you're to start at the beginning, the first thing that you really need to do is define your scope. So what can you include? Are you looking at scope 1 and 2, which is your your fuels that are used on site, your grid electricity that you use? Are you going to sort of branch into looking at scope 3, which is where it gets more complicated in terms of looking at your supply chain and your products and services. So you want to define your scope, what are you going to include, and then really go out there and collect data. So you need to engage across the business to collect as much data as you can in terms of energy that's used, and working with suppliers to find out information on their carbon emissions, etc. And then there's loads of tools out there. I mean, we at UBS and most organisations do sort of align to the GHG protocol, and that gives very strong guidelines in terms of how you calculate your emissions based on the data. And then once you've got your data, obviously you can use that to identify opportunities for reduction. So that's a major part of net zero. It's not just about balancing. So you don't just say, these are our emissions and we're going to offset them. You have the first step is really to measure your emissions, reduce as much as you can, and then your residual emissions that you maybe can't get rid of at this point in time, you can either offset or sequester.
And what's interesting, Anna, is that the pledge goes beyond UBS's own internal carbon footprint, but also that it's asking companies that UBS invests in the investment arm to achieve net zero emissions too. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, it's really important to us. So we have ISO 14001 environmental management system. We've had that for nearly 30 years, and that doesn't just encompass our in-house operations, it also encompasses all our products and services. So, you know, it would be sort of strange if we were doing everything right in our offices, but then that didn't extend to the products and services. So yeah, it does. And actually, my role is focusing on in-house, but we link in a lot with the wider sustainability, and sustainable investments is the biggest growing proposition at the moment.
And Ryan, so working with Hannah, how are you shaping the travel strategy to support the overall objectives?
Yes, so hi, well, yeah, so yeah, I'm leading the Go Green initiative within the UBS around the travel program, where we're really trying to raise awareness with sustainability, and try to influence the employees to make conscious decisions, on their travel plans at the kind of time of planning and booking. So we want to give them the right information around their CO2 emissions, what that that will reflect when they're making that booking. So giving them the right information. So we're looking at updating our booking tools to show these emissions, and not just for air, but also adding all the other commodities, hotel, car, and rail. And again, not just to show a number, but we're trying to give something that people can relate to, sort of like like a tree icon or disposable coffee cups or something like that. Just because you see a number, people don't really know what that means. So we're really trying to think of ways to make that more digestible or relating. And then also looking at ways to incentivize bookers and travelers, through gamification, just to give them some kind of reward for doing a good job in terms of their CO2 footprints.
Excellent. So Scott actually just asked a question, which is, I think, relevant. Hi, Scott. He's asking what percentage of UBS's total emissions are linked to business travel. Is that something you guys are looking at?
Ooh, I have got that somewhere, but I haven't got it to hand.
All right, let's come back to that.
Yeah.
And so Scott will come back to you. But Tina, what do you think of that approach? And are you doing something similar? How does your strategy different in any way?
Sure. So we're doing some of the same things that Ryan mentioned, incorporating things into the online booking tool and into some of our other systems and tool to educate travelers on how to travel smarter, how to travel well, and just be more informed about the choices that they're making. In addition to that, we've put forth a new travel policy, trying to incorporate sustainability and wellness into that policy. It's in the approval phase now. It has to go before a committee for approval. And then one of the other things that I think we're starting to do a lot more of is collaborating with our suppliers and doing different initiatives. So we recently did one with our agency partner where we clean, we unite, we change the world together. We did some specific initiatives from a team building perspective, and then we're also partnering with our suppliers on I call it kind of some healthy competitiveness on wellness and sustainability and what each program is doing and how it contributes to that.
Excellent. So it'd be great to see poll results and ask Louise to sort of talk about that. Do we have that, Joni? Pretty even split between no, yes, and working on it. So Louise, does that kind of reflect what you're seeing in the market and what's happening out there in terms of awareness of sustainability in the travel sector?
Yeah, thank you, Kisa. We see companies in different stages, as the poll reflects. Many companies are still at a starting point. Maybe it's because their company as a whole hasn't really decided what its sustainability program looks like and isn't public about it. And therefore, when it comes to travel, we have a harder time aligning that policy and making it public and talking about it openly. So as the poll reflects, there are quite a few companies still in that. On the opposite side, you have organizations like the ones here on the panel and others who are making very public statements, especially on the heels of coming out of the pandemic. Just the decrease in demand has automatically sent us off in search of ways to keep our sustainability in check. Like the other panelists mentioned, we're seeing a giant push beyond just measuring, which is still very important, and buyers want to measure at a more granular level, which I know we've talked about with your team, but also carrying it through to the point of sale and letting travelers make informed decisions. But the more we do that, the less travelers are going to accept very generic indicators. So we're going to have to get tighter on the types of things we show at the point of sale.
Excellent. So, Anne, I think the audience will really want to hear where you are in the journey, especially since you don't have massive resources like maybe the biggest companies do. So how would you advise our listeners or attendees to get started?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as we discussed when we were prepping for this call, I was basically given my carbon budget that I had to back into because our company recently made a very public statement about our net zero initiative to become fully net zero by 2040. But part of that initiative is looking at travel and our supply chain within the scope 3 and making sure that travel is reduced by 25% by 2025. So I'm actually in the process of developing the strategy to back into that carbon budget that's already been announced. And the many ways we're going to look at that is starting with our data. So we're doing a deeper dive into our data to really look at the trip purpose, to start looking at short duration trips, internal travel, which makes up about 25% of our travel, or did as of 2019. So most likely those two areas, short duration trips as well as internal travel, will slightly shift over to virtual platforms. I really don't believe the company will allow as much internal travel as they did before the pandemic. I think external travel, especially for customer travel, is still going to be very much allowed, but perhaps we'll be changing our classes of service or suggesting that, if you are going to take a business class trip, that business class flight actually has less emissions if you take an overnight flight versus a day flight. So we're just starting to delve into all the data to see where the strategy is actually going to go. But, I echo a lot of the things that the other panelists have said, that, we need to give much more information at that point of sale so you can change the traveler behavior. And at the moment, I think a lot of the online booking tools are really lacking more information at the point of sale. Most of them can give you the information regarding how much emissions that flight choice you took, the output of that emissions, but they don't give you alternatives. And that's what I'm really looking for, is to find a way to give more information at the point of sale so our travelers can make informed decisions about alternative means of travel, whether that's an alternative flight, an alternative airline, or perhaps switching from air travel to train travel if that's doable based on their city pairs. So, it's a multi-pronged approach, and we're just starting out to build it.
Yeah, so Beth West has actually asked a question, and please jump in, all of you. Have you integrated the carbon footprint or carbon impact at the point of sale, and is that a goal that you guys have in mind?
I'll
Well,
take that.
I'll-
Go on.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, it is a goal for us. Yeah, it isn't there at the minute. You know, it is, I think you said the online booking tools don't have those capabilities to a standard that we would like to use at the minute, but it is certainly a goal that we want to bring that in, yes.
Tina?
Yeah, and that's basically what I was going to say, is that I don't think there's any online booking tools, at least those that are being used in the Americas or EMEA, that really have a robust information at that point of sale. I think a lot of these tools are kind of stuck using traditional calculations and just giving basic information at the point of sale. So it's, we're looking at things like doing browser, extensions and things like that to kind of enhance that information at the point of sale.
What about you, Tina? Is that something you're looking at?
Yeah, we're doing the same thing that Anne just mentioned. We're looking at browsers extensions as well to deliver that information at point of sale.
Excellent. So this is something we'd love to come back and see how you guys are faring and once you roll it out. So let's move on to the second poll question, stakeholder engagement. So again, for the buyers especially, how engaged is senior management in executing the travel sustainability strategy? Very engaged, somewhat, or not engaged? So, okay, so, there you go. So to our panelists, really, what are the challenges and opportunities in communicating or executing the strategy, whether with stakeholders or travelers? Because you're getting a lot of face time, I think. It's a very, very, very visible project and probably comes with it a lot of new opportunities to engage. So let's start with you, Tina.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge, I mean, ours is very engaged, and it's kind of threefold. It's not just around environmental sustainability, but it's also around equity as part of the journey. We have a longstanding commitment to our employees, the health and safety of them, the environment, and all of the communities in which Pfizer operates. So we follow the green chemistry model. And we do report on it. We have a very active corporate affairs team and corporate sustainability team that work together to ensure efficiency around our drug as far as the manufacturing process and the distribution process, but also in creating the right environment for employees, to work in and be aware of the green initiatives that are in place. So they're very committed. I think that the challenge for us on the travel team is identifying what does sustainability mean, because it is a very individual thing or a very corporate driven initiative, depending on the company. So, it's really trying to identify that and report out it in a way that resonates with senior leadership. And because it does mean something different for everybody, and also align then, of course, with the overall corporate goals.
Excellent. And Anne, do you think that sustainability initiatives are also can increase the strategic nature of the travel management? And how have you sort of been engaging with your senior leadership?
Oh, I definitely think sustainability initiatives do make the travel manager more strategic and more visible within an organization. I can only speak from my own experience at S&P. We have great stakeholder engagement at the executive level. It was our CFO that actually signed off on our new net zero initiative. And he is the one that's actually driving this initiative. So, having that level of engagement ensures that the communication will be flowing, once all the details regarding the initiative start to flow. But I think from as a travel manager, I'm now kind of in the spotlight because I need to come up with those recommendations of how we're going to drive this initiative through the travel program. So, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. And I think I mentioned to you in the prep call that I think it's interesting. I've been in travel for almost 20 years, and this is the first time I'll be launching a sustainability program. So I think that speaks volumes to how many companies are really just starting out on this journey, as opposed to those that are much further along. Yeah,
excellent. So let's take a look at the poll results and see if very engaged, somewhat engaged, not engaged. So it's actually, if you think of 75% of senior management engaged in something related to travel, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because BAU sort of pre-COVID, they probably weren't that engaged at all in travel, in the C-suite certainly. So this is, I think, goes to Anne and Tina's point about an opportunity to actually take some leadership. So engagement does come with, comes from communication and two-way dialogue, stakeholders based on data. So a question for Hannah, from a company-wide perspective, how does UBS hold itself accountable?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? Especially like, net zero is, everywhere, and there's claims everywhere, and it's really important that we're robust in our claims and we can back them up with what we're actually delivering across the business. So I think for us, it's really about transparency, really engaging in the discussion and sharing information. And also we utilize a lot of third-party sort of certification schemes and programs, etc. So we have the ISO standards. The 14001 is a global standard for us, and we have the energy management system across Europe as well. So we use both of those. Obviously, they're externally audited across all of our sites. And then we also sort of subscribe to the CDP, Climate Disclosure Project, the DJSI, all these sort of external benchmarks where they sort of annually publish their list, and you sort of clamour to see where you are, and you have to provide all the data into those systems. So that's a really, really important way that we are accountable for our actions, and also sort of sharing information publicly. And I guess our targets, so we disclose obviously in our annual report how we're progressing against the targets, and we consult with stakeholders on our targets, what they're going to be and how we're doing against them. So yeah, I think it's really important to be accountable and be transparent and sort of engage on the topic.
Well, related to that, Ryan, would you say that your responsibility to provide that information and insight will only increase over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, today we provide metrics on our air, around travel for air only. We're taking, for instance, we measure the short, medium, long haul distance and the class type, and then that produces our emissions for the offsetting. But going forward, we want to provide more benchmarking around this to, get visibility for the business to start looking at, different travel persona types by divisions, by functions, and how they are, comparing against others to, give them that visual guilt in certain respects to track that. But then, we will be branching out, into other commodities, as I said earlier. It's just air at the minute, but it's looking at the hotel, rail and car, and how there's not a global standard out there at the minute. So it's working.
I'd like to kind of dig into some of that shortly, but maybe Louise, maybe you can sum this up for us. If data is sort of the lifeblood of the modern business, how important is accurate data and data analysis in terms of executing a sustainability strategy?
That's a great question. And in theory and in practice, one of the reasons companies are hesitant to be public and firm up their strategy is because they're having a hard time interpreting data and figuring out how much the change in demand is going to get them to their goal, and what else do they have to do, and how do they avoid making predictions that don't hold up when travel demand returns. That's the part that I think a lot of companies are struggling with. And so decisions to try to influence employees when they're purchasing travel, decisions on, as Ryan mentioned, which standards do you use? Because they're really just formulas. There isn't truly standard out there. And then third, it's about credibility, because some of the measurements we use right now, some of the behavior management tools that we use right now are so high level, they don't pass muster with travelers who really care about this topic. So we definitely need innovation. We need more granular detail with data, and we need better tools at the point of sale, all of that.
Outstanding. So Ryan, I think that leads really well to the lack of granularity, really. I mean, even in flights, you cannot really get the true carbon footprint for a given flight. You know, what for that class airfare, for that route, but it is better than hotels, isn't it? I mean,
Oh,
some of the
absolutely, yeah.
commodities are pretty difficult to actually get your arms around it.
Yeah, as you said, you know, air is pretty, you know, it's the most robust at the moment. You know, you can look at the air type, the class, you know, the mileage, as I said earlier, is what we look at. But when you look into the hotels, for instance, you know, there is not a standard across that. Different countries, different hotel chains, you know, you got to look at the individual property. You know, as part of sort of our hotel RFP, and we're looking at adding questions into that now around, you know, waste management, recycling, their energy consumption, water, to then build a kind of measurement that we can set as a track, as a baseline to then, you know, achieve, give them their rating based on those scores to see how they are for their selection, as it were.
So maybe for the panelists, so if we could actually isolate and really measure the impact per property, per, you know, the unit of service across the commodities, would you be more inclined to incorporate that into your RFP process and selection process? Because there's a bit of a challenge in doing so right now. How do you feel about that? Anne, maybe start with you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that getting to granular reporting, whether it's air, hotel, or cars, is really, you know, the end goal in all this. And I do think that there are certain third parties out there that have better calculators than others, that are not necessarily using these traditional average type approach, which can either overestimate or underestimate how you're actually doing with your emissions reporting. So if there was more, you know, if there was a standard within the hotel industry, I think that would be great. But, you know, knowing our industry, is there really any standard? You know, I think it almost as if, you know, the brands create their own standards, and then all the different, you know, it's like the airlines, they have all their own different, you know, every time they do some sort of change with class of service or, you know, baggage or whatever it is, they recreate the standard, right? So it is a very challenging industry to actually nail down a standard that every one of the, you know, the brands within that commodity will actually follow. Because a lot of times, you know, that becomes part of their branding, and it's not necessarily an industry standard per se.
Yeah, I can understand why it's not that granular. I mean, as Hannah knows, they're trying to measure the footprint of everything, not just travel, from construction to everything, energy, and to have some sort of you know, template or for travel kind of made sense at a very high level. But now if you're trying to use it to drive different policies, etc., it becomes really difficult. And maybe there's an opportunity for the travel managers, perhaps working with the organizations, to suggest ways and the need for granularity back into the GHG and other groups like that.
Yeah, to add there, Keith, up, you know, I'm working there with Hannah's team, you know, in sustainability, to sort of look at these standards to set, because it's all got to be transparent and, you know, aligned to, if we're having it on the front end booking tool and that's what you're showing, it's the back end reporting. So making sure all those calculations are all going to be the same. Otherwise, we're just going to have different numbers to what was from the start to what we're reporting on at that global level.
So I want to turn to Tina because so travel, leisure and business, you might be surprised to learn that it's actually only comprises 16% of human carbon emissions, which is 51 billion tons of carbon per annum. The largest component is manufacturing. So, so Tina is a panelist whose company has a large manufacturing footprint. And I wanted to ask Tina at a high level, sort of what is Pfizer's overall sustainability strategy in terms of manufacturing?
Yeah, so we're, you know, we started in 2012 where we put in place what we call our green journey. And, you know, for the third year in a row in 2020, we met our reduction goals for our greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and water. And then we are part of a larger organization, PSCI, which is the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative organization, that is really with companies aside from Pfizer, they're committed to promoting the responsible supply chain management. And one example that we have is in Freiburg, Germany. We have a manufacturing facility over there. It's powered by solar. It has a continuous processing technology that automates much of the process, making it more efficient. And, ultimately our job is to make sure the drugs get to patients in the fastest way and not compromising, quality or safety. So we have done a lot of things to automate and optimize the process, holding our manufacturers and our suppliers accountable to the distribution of the drug and the packaging of the drug, and the health and safety around all of that, and also the labor and the ethics pieces of things, because we manufacture drugs all across the globe. I think we have 42 manufacturing facilities. So that's also a big component. And just to tack on to something Louise said earlier, it is the people that are really passionate about this, kind of laugh at our conversation sometimes about it, because if you dig really deep, people that are really passionate about it, it is all encompassing, and it's not only around the environmental, but it's around healthy and safety, and the ethical part of it, and the human trafficking. I mean, there's just so many components of it, and I find each individual has their own passion about it. And within companies, I think CEOs also drive some of that passion from a corporate perspective. And we did a couple of initiatives in our travel group where we thought it was a very green initiative. And we had a lot of great feedback, but we also had some, what I'll call constructive feedback back that said, okay, gosh, you did this, which is really great, but how much of this was impacted, environmentally? So people will poke holes also in some of the initiatives that you do because of the different passions. But we are committed on the supply chain side to efficiency and automating a lot of that process and making it clean.
But Tina, you mentioned before, it's really, once you peel the onion, you might switch packaging to a greener packaging, but then it has a much more adverse from a cleaning perspective and so on and so forth. So
absolutely,
it's not just black and white, is it? So it's kind of a big,
really not
big decision.
It's really not. Yeah.
Scott has asked, it's great. Keep it coming, Scott. Keep asking questions. He asked a question about green suppliers, so that's great. So let's move on to our next poll question. It's our final poll question. Would your organization pay more for green travel? No. Up to 10% more? More than 10%? And this goes exactly to Scott's question. And I think really apropos because within this last week, Deloitte and Delta announced an initiative to use sustainable aviation fuel. So let's kind of dig into this. So much of the sustainability strategy of corporations and the programs we've discussed today is loosely based on reducing carbon, mainly by reducing travel. And also, as Hannah mentioned, also the use of carbon offsets to meet net zero targets. And while this is a great outcome and much needed, as Bill Gates says, you're only delaying the disaster until you can get to zero carbon, which means bringing that 51 billion tons of carbon generated to zero. This means, amongst other things, buying and using green energy. And although purchasing green electricity is now more common, green air flights are not. So currently, sustainable aviation fuels, also called green jet fuel, cost 3 times more than regular jet fuel. And because on average, the fuel cost is about 10% of the air ticket, what this means is that on average, buying green air travel would cost 20% more per ticket, everything else being equal. So Louise, what do you think about the Deloitte announcement? And do you think other companies would pay more for green travel?
Yeah, I think it's about context. So, extremely price sensitive, short haul, consumer driven, small business driven. I don't see it, not in the next few years. But if you look at long haul travel that is, very much driven by the largest corporate accounts, corporate programs in the world. Do I think that it's likely they'll, accept to pay more based upon accepting a different discount from one of their preferred suppliers and having that pervasive in their program, promoting a different threshold for lowest logical airfare when certain conditions are met on sustainability? Absolutely, I believe that'll happen, and I believe that the buyers that I've talked to under certain conditions think it makes sense. And most importantly, so I think their C-suites do as well, or Deloitte and Delta would have been pretty unlikely to take that risk.
Yeah, exactly. And you thought that coming out of COVID, the prices are going to go up anyway, and maybe this incremental increase is something that the market could take.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that the market can absorb this kind of increase. I mean, I think most corporations and business travelers would rather pay more for greener travel than paying for different amenities, getting to their flight, right? I mean, we've all gotten used to, paying for bags, paying for food, paying for this, paying for that, as you get onto your flight. So, I mean, I think it would be, probably better received if what you were paying extra for was actually flying more sustainably and more green.
Well, there may be an offset anyway. So Hannah, I think some of these carbon offset trading costs is up to what, $100 a ton or more, and potentially the green travel actually is a positive benefit. It doesn't need to get offset basically. So maybe there's a cost benefit as well ultimately when it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think, it's the same for, you mentioned before, sort of sourcing green energy, and that goes to the business as a business proposal, much as this would, I guess. And it's about looking at the whole impact and the whole picture. So whilst you might have an increased cost in the cost of the ticket, as you say, you may see savings elsewhere. So actually, as a whole proposal, it is viable. And I think sort of once you factor in the fact that sustainability is now the direction that people are going and it's the right thing to do, then yeah, these are the conversations that we need to be having, definitely. And looking at the options and looking at the costs and weighing up the whole sort of offering.
Yeah, so we have another question from the audience, which is do you think green air flights and eco hotels and electric ground fleets, etc., will or should become part of the portfolio of sourcing for travel managers?
I think it comes on behavior and demand, isn't it? The more demand there is, the more that will come up. If you take cars for an example, you look at electric cars. We didn't have electric cars 10 years ago. Now we're seeing more and more electric cars coming into the market. Companies are having to build those. And the infrastructure is not there, but it will get there eventually. So it's going to progress. But yeah, definitely. I think to answer the question, there will be more drive towards more sustainable, just across across all commodities.
Excellent. So how do we do in the poll result? A little bit more. That's not bad actually, because the eco hotels, I don't think there's much of a difference in terms of prices, because the green energy is already quite well received in the big cities. Is that anyone surprised by this? Louise?
I'm not surprised by it, because I think it's still somewhat of an abstract concept.
Yeah.
Because when you say you're going to pay more, how are you measuring that? Do I think that suppliers will make their differences obvious? Do I think that the displays that we'll have for travelers to make the decisions are going to be perfectly clear? No. So I think it's hard to actually prove that you're paying more. But I think in the end, if we base our procurement strategy on these concepts, we invest in our corporate travel programs in data and analytics, to Ryan's point earlier, carrying through the different assumptions that you made when you offered things to travelers to the back end to where we measure. I think that's critical. So I think it's going to be hard to actually put pen to paper on this topic, but let's see. That's what managed travel is all about.
Anybody else want to comment? Good. So we're coming to the end of the sort of the plan session. Plenty of questions though, and I think this first one is probably ideal for you, Anne. So our consultants are telling us to only travel economy to cut carbon. I think this will be very difficult to implement. Any advice?
Yeah, I feel your pain to whoever said that question, because I had a similar situation at S&P, and I don't believe that. I really don't believe that. I think, you know, there are some very boilerplate suggestions that a lot of consultants will make in regards to trying to push more sustainable travel. But I do think there are other ways of doing it, and we're working, we will be working with a different group, a different consultant on that. You know, I think, you know, when you start looking at the actual aircrafts, the type of fuels on the aircraft, the time of day that that flight is going, you know, there are so many different components that go into the actual flight that they're taking, and whether that's a sustainable flight or not. But you also have to look at your corporate culture. And this was something that I had said to the group that actually did our initial assessment for S&P, that, you know, just shifting everyone from first and business class to premium economy or economy is not going to work for our corporate culture, because our competitors are not going to be doing that. They're not going to have these draconian measures in place, and we're going to lose talent. So we have to find that happy medium where you can keep your talent, you can give them certain perks that they're accustomed to, especially if someone is a road warrior and are going to be flying intercontinental, you know, 20, 30, 40 times a year. I mean, you have to take those things into consideration, because that also deals with the wellness of the traveler, right? So, you know, it's a very fragile balancing act. But I don't agree with this concept that you just shift everybody into economy and bingo, you've reached your goals. I think that's, you know, a very convenient and perhaps a more traditional way of looking at travel sustainability.
And that's a great example of why generic recommendations don't work very well, because sustainability can't live on its own as a corporate objective, right? We have diversity, inclusion, equity. We have all these things that we've talked about when Tina was speaking before. If we don't find the balance of all of them, we're not really going to be on the search for healthy businesses, talent acquisition and development, and profit.
Excellent. So we got time for one final question, and this is, I guess, to Louise. How do you think COVID-19 lockdown will affect the CORSIA Accord? Maybe you should explain what CORSIA is first, Louise.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing is going to be that companies have to take various regulations and various governing bodies seriously. And I think governments are handling things differently all over the world. And so, you know, I think each market is looking at things in ways that adapt to the businesses on the ground there and the cultures there. I mean, look at the difference between the way things are happening in Asia and the way things are happening where we are in the USA, for example. So I don't know that there's much more to say about it. I don't know if someone else has a comment about it.
Well, the benchmark, you know, it's an accord of the countries about their and to benchmark based on the average of 2019 and 2020 data, might be difficult to meet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we'll see over the course of time, and I think that the UN has some thinking to do as well about the baseline, because I'm not sure what they have in place will work. And that's why I was mentioning the differences between the different regions and countries. I think some countries are saying, hey, that might be okay, it worked for me. And others are saying, oh, it's not really going to work.
Well, let me sneak in one last question for Hannah, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
A question on carbon offsets. The market for carbon offsets is a little like the Wild West, with costs ranging from $1 to $100 per ton. So what's the best practice in terms of vetting the project, verifying the carbon reduction, and how do you get started with that?
Well, I know from a UBS perspective, we sort of keep it simple in that we only support projects which there's a gold standard for voluntary emissions reductions. So we support 2 large projects, predominantly focus on wind farms, but they're certified to this sort of external gold standard level. So you know that they're sort of legitimate, and also there's a big question around additionality with the carbon offsets. So are you supporting something that wouldn't happen if you weren't supporting it? And you really want to make sure that you're getting that additionality, so you really genuinely are offsetting carbon. So yeah, that's what we do.
Excellent. So I think we've run out of time. For our attendees, please stay on and fill out a 1-minute survey. And especially at the end, let us know if you wanted to receive a documentation listing all the various resources available on sustainability. So happy to share that with you. And for our panelists, thank you all so very much for a very enlightening session. Hopefully this webinar has given you an idea on what other companies are doing in the sustainability space and some inspiration to apply to your own company. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having
Yeah.
us.
Thank you.
Bye.